The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say first that this is my first opportunity to speak to this today. I completely support the Supply Day motion. I first raised this issue in the House on October 25th of last year, that these negotiations were going to begin, that Canada should play a leadership role. I raised it again on February 22nd of this year. I'm very concerned that Canada is not there. I was one of 900 recipients of the Order of Canada who have asked that Canada play a role, a leadership role in these negotiations. So I put it to the honourable member. He's absolutely right that Canada played a lead role in the effort to get rid of landmines. And we undertook those negotiations knowing that the countries that used landmines the most were not at the table. The United States and Russia are not at the table. They plan to modernize their nuclear weapons regime. I was alive during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember it. We do not want our children to have nuclear nightmares. We must negotiate at the UN for nuclear disarmament. And, Mr. Speaker, I hope the Liberals will reconsider.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess the most important thing I can do in response to the member is to assure the leader that we have a government that is, in fact, progressing and moving forward on the issue. As I indicated, Canada led 159 countries in bringing forward a UN resolution that brings nuclear powers to the table to work pragmatically towards disarmament through fissile material cutoff treaty. The fissile material, that's the explosive stuff. That's what causes the reactions, Mr. Speaker. This is Canada playing leadership on the important file where we have nuclear power states at the table with us. I think we can all be proud of that fact.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands. I'd like to thank my colleague for an excellent speech. I agree fully. I am I am an officer of the Order of Canada, and I signed with those other officers the Declaration of Canada to join these essential negotiations for the safety of the planet.
I'm back actually today from the United Nations for work on the Oceans Conference, and the subject of Canada's absence in these nuclear disarmament talks came up. I was asked by other delegates why it was that Canada wasn't participating, as under this new Liberal government, it has been seen that Canada's back. We played a constructive role in the Paris negotiations. The absence of Canada in these talks makes people wonder why. This is a role Canada traditionally had played. Lloyd Axworthy leading the negotiations for the Landmines Treaty, the Ottawa process, for an example. It baffles me that we're not at the table, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if my honourable colleague has any theories as to why Canada is staying away from these talks.
The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her question, and I'd like also to thank her for her signature at the bottom of this letter sent to the current Prime Minister. And obviously, the Green Party has joined forces with us in this battle. First, the Liberal government's response was to hide behind the fissile material cutoff treaty. Now, it's fine to adopt that treaty, but with regard to the production, possession, and use of nuclear weapons, cannot replace such a treaty with regard to nuclear disarmament. It would also appear that the Liberal government is hiding behind Canada's belonging to NATO, and they're saying to the Allies to oppose negotiations. Canada has no reason to follow Trump's direction on this issue. Canada's membership in NATO does not mean that it should vote with nuclear countries. Canada should draw lessons from the Netherlands, that are also a member of NATO, but that are participating in the negotiations.
For Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Battle River Crowfoot for his presentation. I have to say, though, that, and he won't be surprised that I disagree, this is not an NDP motion to engage the world in action. This is a United Nations negotiation that is taking place, and it's being led by Austria, Ireland, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, and Sweden, countries with whom we have strong relationships, countries with whom we're in strong trading relationships. It is not far-fetched that you start the negotiations and bring others in. I note that Iran is actually in these negotiations. I also note that Canada started out in the lead on landmines and cluster munitions when the countries that used landmines and cluster munitions were not in the room. The question is, while the United Nations negotiates this, and this is my question to my friend from Battle River Crowfoot, what possible advantage is there for Canada as a country that wants to show leadership in the world to ignore negotiations where there's even a chance that the process of negotiation will bring in those countries who are now, as he says himself, modernizing their nuclear weapons and endangering our entire world?
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot in 45 seconds or less, please.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I think the Liberal government today has determined that there is not a lot of benefit of being at those, and so I'm not certain of why they made all the decision that they did not to be engaged in those. I guess they went to their convention. They said that they were going to be involved in these kinds of exercises, and today they've looked and said that it's not worthwhile. Let me just quickly say, Mr. Speaker, that in preparation for this talk, I went back to 2007 to a meeting that we had where my old and good friend, I shouldn't say old, but Doug Roche was there, Alberta Member of Parliament and Senator, Ernie Regier from Project Plowshares. Mr. Speaker, I would say, again, in response to the honourable member from Toronto, but prior to Saanich Gulf Islands question, the concerns that they talked about that day seemed in some regards to already have taken place, and so the threat is even greater. When the threat becomes greater, we must be vigilant in what we do, but we shouldn't be spending time on things that perhaps
Honourable
may not be
member
effective.
for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank my friend from South Okanagan, West Kootenay. Earlier in the debate, member for Calgary Shepherd described what Ronald Reagan had done as though he was happy with incremental work to remove nuclear weapons from the world. I happen to have had the honor of working with Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev relayed the personal story of the moment when he got frustrated with the pace of negotiations. He actually picked up a phone. He picked up the phone and he told his staff, "I want to call the President of the United States." Ronald Reagan answered, took his phone personally, and Mikhail Gorbachev said, "I said to him, Mr. President, do you want to get rid of nuclear weapons? Because I do." And Ronald Reagan said, "Yes, I do." And Gorbachev said, "I'm afraid all our negotiators are going to do is drink vodka forever and just talk. But we need to do this." They intended to do it. The world's political leadership have dropped the ball. It's time for us to pick it up. Will the member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay, agree that Canada should be, I mean, his whole speech said it, I've just asked him to reiterate, why on earth is Canada not at the table with nations like the Netherlands, a NATO ally, working to raise the political momentum towards getting rid of nuclear weapons?
Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would really like to thank the member from Saanich Gulf Islands for that comment, because I totally agree. We can't get anywhere if we're not talking. If we just, as the Prime Minister said the other day, think that these negotiations are useless, I mean, they're becoming more useless to Canada because we are being written off the world stage as a real player in negotiations around the diplomacy of getting rid of these weapons. We have to be there at the talks, we have to be working, we have to be leading as much as we can. And that's what's going to bring the major players to the table when they see the rest of the world working on this. They're all human beings like we are. They probably want to get rid of these weapons as well, as the member said. And we have to create that space, that climate to make that happen. Thank you.